19th century, New York City was crazy for oysters, and this was true through most of that century, maybe even all of it. And because of this, boats were developed specifically for that trade. They were shallow draft, had large rigs because this was before the engine, and they were rigged as sloops in the summer, catboats in the wintertime. So 2 sails summer, 1 in the winter. The catboat version of this boat migrated up and down the coast, and in New Jersey was modified to suit the back bays. Qualities of a New Jersey catboat were low freeboard, that made it easier to fish and produce less windage and breeze. Shallow draft, they carried day cabins which could be removed according to the work that they were doing. And eventually the rudders would move from the transom to underneath the boat. But they were in New Jersey to work. This was before pleasure boats, before the Civil War. After the Civil War, there was a railroad boom, which completely changed the character of the Jersey Shore, first gradually and then in a rush. The first trains went to Cape May, Atlantic City, Toms River, and Point Pleasant. Communities sprung up around these areas that catered to summer people from Philadelphia primarily. The shore was 10 degrees cooler than the city, so a very desirable place to be. Fishermen could use the trains to move product back to the city, but the primary value of the trains was moving people to the shore. Catboats were chartered to serve tourists, first as ferries, then as excursion boats. As the train lines filled in along the shore, the necessity of ferries was less, but still a boat was the way to go if you wanted to go hunting, fishing, or take a picnic on some deserted part of the barrier islands. Because of all of this, catboat builders thrived all along the coast. The boats were built rough and ready, heavy and quick, iron fastened, maybe a 20-year lifespan. So the building process was to first create a model, half model, and then lift shapes directly from it. And if any correction was needed, that could be done by trimming the frames, which were very heavy and had enough wood that you could get away with doing that. So they would set up the keel, the stem, transom, and then the frames. Probably start with the middle frame, fly battens to bow and stern, tweak them around till it suited the builder's eye, and then fix everything in place and start to put the skin on the outside of the boat. Clubs were formed to connect vacationers with charter captains. So we're talking a very stratified society here. The people who are coming to the shore are well-to-do for the most part, and staying in hotels first and then later cottages as each built their own. But they needed a place to meet up with boat captains to arrange a hunting trip or picnic or whatever. They didn't mingle socially. So the first clubs were actually created so that they had a meeting place. This charter business eventually led to informal racing. You know, whenever a couple of boats are going to the same destination for whatever purpose, it's only human nature that they're going to race there and back. And so competition started to develop and eventually became formalized. Formal racing began in Toms River with the Toms River Cup. Work boats came from all over. There was a trophy and a purse. The early winners were workboats. One of note was built actually up in the Raritan Bay area by a builder named Bill Force. He built both the Martha and the Gem. We have one picture, very tattered, of the Martha, and she was very successful. She won the cup several times. Over time, boats were purpose-built to win this cup. This is the era of Corinthian sailing. That is the era when the owners, instead of paying professionals to race their boats and betting on the results, decided they wanted to sail the boats themselves. Formal racing gave rise to purpose-built boats just to win the trophies, and brought in naval architects. What was going on in the shipyards at this time was the rise of steel as a shipbuilding material. And the one thing about iron and steel is the drawings have to be extremely accurate. There is no guesswork. There is no shaving a little steel off to bring a shape fair or anything like that. Right? It's got to come right off of the plan, which is blown up to full size or close to it, and then patterns are made and the steel is cut and put together. These are very complex structures. That process migrated to the process of building boats, and it was driven by racing, by the competition. The new way to build a boat was to draw plans and then expand them into a full-scale drawing. You'd make patterns from this drawing and molds. The molds are vertical pieces that describe the shape of the boat. They're not actually part of the finished boat. And once that mold is set up, you wrap the frames and the planking around it. This produces a lighter and therefore faster boat. If you're building a series of the same design, you could amortize the cost of building that mold and the drawings over several boats. But if you were building one boat, it was a much more expensive way to do it than the workboats had been using. This had a couple of effects on the look of boats. They became identifiable by designer rather than region. Before the Civil War, you could tell where a boat was from by the way it looked. The process of designing for a specific trade and body of water created individual looks, and there didn't seem to be a lot of communication between one area and another. In the era of the designer, that they all were following each other, really watching what each other were doing, and using each other's ideas, and each designer developing a style of his own. And you could determine the lineage of a boat by designer, not necessarily by where it was from. Lightweight construction wins races. And a lot of what was going on in this era was figuring out how to make plank-on-frame wooden boats lighter and lighter. Good example is two designs by Nat Herreshoff. The Merry Thought of 1892, which I think won a lot of races, and some would say eliminated the working race boats from the scene altogether because it was so much faster. And those boats weren't dependent on racing for their living. They were depending on their charter business. The Wanda, built in 1898, I believe, illustrates the changes that happened in 6 short years, both in construction. They're using strapping to strengthen the hull and the deck. And you're also noticing long overhangs. So apparently there was a handicap rule at the time that penalized a long water line. So they would have these great overhangs that when the boat heeled over with the pressure of wind on the sail, the water line got a lot longer. This is an era that brought about an explosion of design ideas in search of speed. and a number of designers around the Barnegat Bay or the New York and Philadelphia area got into this. A. Carey Smith, who is a noted maritime artist, was also a designer, and he is credited with being the first yacht designer to do his plans completely on paper. No model building at all. Nat Harishoff rather famously would build a model and then take the lines from that and produce drawings. Charles Maurer also was a real experimenter, and you can see an example here of a boat with bilge boards, that is, a centerboard on either side of the boat, and spade rudders, and a truss system inside the boat in an attempt to strengthen it while keeping it light. What's going on in the background is the arrival of the internal combustion engine. Workboats almost immediately replaced their rigs with engines. There are no more scenes of sails drying along the docks. The charter business is about fishing and hunting and getting to where you want to go, not sailing. They would install an engine and be able to deliver their clients on time to the fishing or hunting grounds. A few cats survived with auxiliary power for pleasure cruising, but as time took its toll, they gradually disappeared, except in the world of racing. One of the problems with that explosion of design information was that in order to stay competitive, you almost had to buy a new boat annually or majorly change the last boat, and that got really expensive. The other problem is that the boats were racing to a rule, and that's just not very satisfying. It is much better to know that you want to race because you're ahead of the boat next to you, not because you're waiting for some committee to decide that the rule favored one boat over another. The solution to this was one design racing. And at first, the individual clubs would commission a fleet of boats that they would race in that club. Eventually, in order to race, the club down the bay, they started going with one design classes that were national in scope. The A-class catboats, which are still racing in Barnegat Bay, were designed by two different designers, Charles Maurer and Francis Weisguth. They were deemed close enough, though, that all the boats were racing together as a one design class. And in the modern era, that continued, with the rule being that you had to build to an existing design rather than creating a new one. All the other cats were designated as B class and raced to a handicap rule as they had in the past. In the 1920s, the B-class boats continued to be built. There are a few examples still around. The queen of the fleet at the time was the catboat Silent Maid, which I did a replica of. There's another one that was rebuilt by de Rouville's boat shop for Henry Coley. That's the Vim. In general, the B-class faded away during the Depression, no longer raced. An interesting one design class, though, in that era was a 17-foot Atlantic City catboat, which joined the fleets of sneak boxes and scows that were racing. This was a Charles Maurer design. It was originally built for a yacht club in Atlantic City, but proved to be so popular that fleets were built up and down the Barnegat Bay. I think there were 60-some boats racing at their peak. There are none around now, however. The A-class barely escaped. They raced into the 1970s and were in really sad shape at that point. The next great innovation in boat building was fiberglass. The old B-class was gone, but the niche that it filled was not. A boat suited to a less athletic competitor, an affordable boat, desire to continue the racing traditions in the Barnegat Bay, led to the introduction of the Sandpiper and Sanderlings. These are both Cape Cod style boats with higher freeboard, and the Sanderling even has a fixed cabin. They proved to be very popular, and right now there are more Sandpipers racing on the Barnegat Bay than any other class. All is not lost for wood, though. Nelson Hartranft, who had a passion for these boats, came up with a plan in the 1980s to save the fleet. He commissioned a new boat from David Beaton and Sons, built from a Francis Wythgood design, and he bought the entire fleet, which sounds impressive, but these boats were really going at fire sale prices. They were really in sad shape by that point. He would resell those boats to anyone who would agree to put it in racing condition. As a result of that, the 5 existing boats were restored. In the same era, Peter Kellogg, who had a great time racing a sinking boat in the 70s, was successful enough in business that he commissioned several boats, most of them coinciding with a boat being commissioned by someone else. So the fleet expanded up to 12 boats, bigger than it had ever been. The boats are fun. Every race is a social occasion with between 6 and 10 people in each boat. They are clearly well suited to the waters, that's why they've lasted so long, and they're fast and weatherly. There's been a real effort to try to maintain them as traditional boats, but I'll tell you, history and racing are strange bedfellows. So over time, a few changes were made, mainly to make them easier to take care of. So they're still plank-on frame boats. They're still built to the original designs, but now they have plywood decks. And in the rigging, you're seeing Harkin blocks, Dacron sails, but still wood mast and boom. Building them really doesn't make any sense at all, except that they're just gorgeous and they're really fun. A variation on this story has taken place from Maine to the Chesapeake Bay. It's a story of the evolution of work boats into pleasure and racing boats, even as the work boats disappeared due to the internal combustion engine and then later fiberglass. But all along the coast, you're finding individual racing classes traditionally built that have managed to survive just because they are so well suited to the area that they're in, and also because their owners just find them magical. They are works of art, really, and well worth preserving.